这周二的单元，我们说到了如何与消费者沟通永续性的议题。今天就有一个著名衣服的品牌 Reformation， 让我们来探讨他们是如何传递这个讯息的。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast.我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. In the last episode, Sherry and Carol identified a few key things when it comes to brands discussing their sustainability and how that matters to consumers. Well, recently, Sherry found an article talking about a brand that has been up and coming and is potentially ready to IPO. And that brand has been touted as the next major sustainable change when it comes to fashion, the Reformation. So today, we want to talk a little bit about their language and the way that they portray themselves in both the media and on their website.
那 Reformation 我相信有一些人可能听过吧，它是在一个等于说年轻一代的蛮著名的衣服品牌。It's a direct-to-consumer type of brand, and also at the same time, they're really known for their dresses, 那种开高叉的一个洋装。That's what I remember. So with Reformation, 他们现在可能要上市了。那当然开始就很多人去检视一下它是怎么样传递他们公司的一些 message or branding。 那在周二呢，我们也讲到了一些 tips on how to communicate the idea of sustainability of your brand, of your company。 那我稍微做个简单的 recap 好了。我们讲到了 localizing your message， 也就是让你的 message 很本土化。每个地区他们重视的永续性的议题都不太一样。第二个就是 certification。 那第三个呢，也就是我们今天可能会比较去来讨论的，也就是 transparency， right？ 你要透明化。Also, like help consumer to see, to visualize what it means by being sustainable for brand. 那最后呢，也就是跟消费者沟通的时候呢， you have to communicate the benefit in a way that they can actually understand.
So looking through the information about the Reformation, you start to pull quotes or you start to see information that relates back to these key messages when it comes to how do you talk about sustainability as a brand. Now, Sherry has said this a few times, but fashion and sustainability just inherently feel contradictory.
Yeah.
Right? The more of anything you make, you are making an impact. So when it comes to this idea of sustainability, then obviously the most sustainable thing would just be don't make more stuff. Yeah. But we do live in a very consumer-driven society, and so that's not always an option. So a lot of these brands are rethinking how do their processes, how does their manufacturing, design, sourcing, etc., have less and less impact on the environment, especially for an industry that produces such a large percentage of the world's pollution and carbon creation.
对啊，我觉得当你有一个衣服的品牌，尤其是它有点类似 fast fashion， 虽然它不是 Shein 也不是 H&M 或 Zara， 但是它也算是一个比较 fast fashion 的一个衣服品牌嘛。So it's really hard to say like, oh yeah, you guys are sustainable. You know, 我们在 record 这个 session 的之前呢，我跟 Nick 有聊到 Patagonia， 也就是另外一个非常不一样的一个品牌。那当然它就是 sustainability。Basically, it's like a model, right, of being sustainable. But we will talk about that in another episode. 那今天呢，我们就来看一下 Reformation 他们是怎么样能够 做他们的 message reframe， 因为我觉得他们是还蛮聪明的，虽然可能很多人还是没有办法很同意他们是很永续性的品牌， but there are some things that they've done. It's quite smart and quite tactful.
So one of the things that the Reformation has gotten credit for is its ability to merge the idea of fashionable items with something that is potentially more sustainable. So one of the other examples that gets brought a lot when it comes to sustainable fashion would be Allbirds, the shoes, who when it IPO'd, it was worth multi-billions of dollars. But then as the trend kind of fell out, then they lost, I think, like 90% of their stock value over time. And so what a lot of investors have been looking at is, I want a brand that can stay in trend, can be something that people will just continue buying, but has that more sustainable angle. So one major quote from an article in the Business of Fashion, it was one of the key investors in the Reformation talking about why he found this brand to be so compelling. And he says, I've been pitched by a countless number of people launching a sustainable brand, and those tend to fail, said Frederick Court, an early investor in Reformation and the founder of Felix Capital, a London-based venture capital firm. What very few brands have managed to do is to make sustainability sexy. Reformation has done that.
And I think this is kind of the key and probably the most successful thing that Reformation has done is to connect their consumer with their brand, with sustainability, right? 如果大家知道 Reformation 或者你可以尝试到他的 website, 你会发现他的衣服真的都蛮 sexy 的 right? It's about showing your skin, showing your legs. 当然不是那种 trashy kind of sexy, but I think it's more like celebrating women's figure, that kind of sexy. 所以这个其实是他们本身的一个品牌，他们就是比较重视 sexiness of a woman. 那所以他就把这个 idea 延续了。If you go to their website and you click on the tab sustainability, you're going to see that quote on their website. It says, being naked is the #1 most sustainable option. We're #2.
You can see that they have some awareness that inherently anything that you make has some kind of non-sustainable component, but they're trying to draw attention to that. Like, #1 is being naked, which plays back into their sexy angle as far as their clothing, their messaging, and then also back to that sustainable thing. So they really do know who their target audience is. This is one of the things that Sherry and Carol talked about before, which is you need to know who your TA is. You need to know what they care about, and then you can target your messaging at them.
Yeah, exactly. 因为我觉得他有很多的这些 message 还是跟他们本身的 branding 是有一种延续性的. So that's why I think they're pretty smart about that. And also at the same time, they're quite transparent with the sustainability idea or eco-friendly activities that they have.
So even as a non-IPO'd company, they do have a chief sustainability officer. And this person has basically worked very hard, whether it's through events or information on their website, to make their sustainability transparent. Every year they do what they call a sustainability report, and you can actually find them on the website starting, I think, in 2017 or 2018, all the way up until 2022, where they actually talk about all the different, how much of their sourcing came from sustainable practices, how many of their threads are recycled, what does their washing or dyeing process look like, etc. Where they're trying to make it look as transparent as possible. Yeah. And this is a pushback against when Sherry and I did that episode on greenwashing, where you have a lot of brands who claim sustainability, claim eco-friendliness, but there's very little evidence or numbers for their own practices to back up what they are saying. In the case of the Reformation, they're trying to be as open as possible.
所以在他们的网站上面，他们就有一个叫做 Reformation's Climate Positive Roadmap。那上面就比如说写着他们的2019年的 footprint and compared to now， 他们也有不同的 metrics, as of now, we have definitely decreased the percentage of fuels that was used, electricity. 那他们有一些 percentage 能够让消费者能够看到all right, 所以你们真的是有一些成果的。So they're quite transparent with the numbers. And what I like is that they are actually making the message more relatable to the consumers, right? 那这个也是我们在周二的时候有稍微提到的一点。So instead of just giving metrics, right? 你可能买我们的衣服可以减少 whatever the metric system is in sustainability. 他们可能会用一些其他的方式让消费者更了解。So for example, like they would say in one example, $248 of sweater made from recycled cashmere saves 600 pounds of CO2 and nearly 3,000 gallons of water when compared to conventional clothing.
In this case, they're trying to break down into units that a consumer would understand. As Sherry said, a lot of times when these companies talk about sustainability, like carbon credits, everyone loves to tote how many carbon credits we have or how many carbon credits we're saving. But I would say to the average consumer, what that translates to as far as environmental protection or pollution, it's very hard to understand. It's like, okay, when you are using carbon credits or creating carbon credit, what does that mean? Right? You need an entire class. And that may be that the consumer needs to be more educated, but the reality is the majority of people cannot translate that into everyday life. Yeah. But when you break down these processes into, okay, here's how much water gets used, you can start to get a sense of okay, when clothing companies produce one item. 3,000 gallons of water is a massive amount of water. Now you can start to realize wow, it takes that much in order to create these clothing. So a lot of these companies have started to break down how many labor hours does it take to make a piece of clothing? How much water does it take to make a piece of clothing? And when the Reformation or Everlane, etc., starts to put this on their website, now you get a stronger sense of, it's actually a lot of impact in order to do all these things.
Yeah, so I felt like, Reformation, even though they may not be the most sustainable clothing brand out there, but they've definitely tried really hard to make it transparent, to make it relatable, and make it visible for their consumers.
A lot of the language used by both Reformation and by their investors really does come back to making things more relatable or making things easier to understood. And although this article is definitely to highlight that this company is pushing towards an IPO, so everything that people have to say is going to be much happier or upbeat, it's worth looking through how the sustainability of fast fashion has gone through an evolution in the way that people talk about it. In a future episode, we'll actually look at another brand that is touted as the pillar of sustainability, Patagonia, and you'll actually see that their language and their angle on talking about is very, very different from Reformation. And it becomes very interesting to look at this very established brand versus this up-and-coming brand, even though they should be aiming at the same goals. So join us in a future episode and continue listening throughout this month where we're going to talk about the language of fashion and the language of luxury, both in the main podcast and also in EP Insight. So if you want more deep dives and breakdowns into understanding really how luxury, premium, fashion, and branding come to life, then be sure to join us also in our EP Insights episodes. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.